You ever walk into a room and feel like all eyes are silently judging you? Like they've already decided who you are based on how you look, before you've said a single word. Now imagine that room is a gym. A place that's supposed to be about self-improvement, strength, and discipline. But for some people, it becomes a hunting ground, a stage for arrogance to flex harder than any muscle. That's where this story begins. But let me tell you right now, this isn't just another fat-shamed guy fights back tale. No, this goes deeper. This story has a twist that will knock the wind out of you and make you rethink every assumption you've ever made about people. So stick with me because you're about to see what real transformation looks like, both outside and in. And yes, by the end of this video, you're going to get the answer you came here for. The question that's burning in your mind right now. What happened when the bully pushed too far? Let's be real for a second. You didn't click on this video by accident. Something about the title made you stop scrolling. Maybe it's because you've seen someone get humiliated in public, and you wished someone had stepped in. Maybe it's because you felt the sting of being underestimated yourself. Or maybe, just maybe, you're curious about what justice looks like when life finally hits back. Whatever brought you here, I want you to know you're in the right place. I'm not just going to tell you a story. I'm going to pull you into a world where strength isn't just measured by biceps and six-packs. It's measured by how you treat people who have nothing to offer you. Or at least that's what you think. So picture this modern-day Los Angeles. The city of dreams, where every corner gym is packed with influencers, protein shakes, and self-proclaimed alphas. One gym in particular stands out. Not because it's the fanciest, but because of a guy named Rick. Rick's the kind of dude you've seen on TikTok doing deadlifts while flexing for the camera, yelling about no days off. He's jacked, no question. Big chest, veiny arms, spray tan that practically glows under the fluorescent lights. People admire him. Or at least they pretend to. Because under that confident grin and shredded body lies something darker. Rick isn't just a fitness junkie. He's a control freak. A bully dressed in Lululemon. And his favorite prey. The people who don't look like they belong in the gym. Then there's Marcus. And listen, I want you to pay close attention to Marcus because this man is about to show you what real courage looks like. Marcus is 43. Overweight. Quiet. Works as an IT manager and hasn't been to the gym in over a decade. But a health scare, one serious enough to leave him staring at the ceiling of an emergency room, woke something up in him. He didn't come to the gym to make friends. He came to survive. To fight for his life. But what he didn't know was that the moment he walked in that gym, carrying nothing but a duffel bag and a little hope, he'd walk straight into a war zone. And Rick couldn't resist the opportunity. From day one, Rick zeroed in on Marcus like a heat-seeking missile. Snide remarks about his weight. Loud, sarcastic clapping whenever Marcus finished a set. Once, Rick even filmed Marcus on his phone struggling with the rowing machine, posted it on Instagram with a caption, "When whales try cardio whale skull." It got over 50,000 likes. Comments full of laughing emojis, fat jokes, and worse. And Marcus saw it. Every single one. Can you imagine that? Trying to take your first steps toward health, only to be mocked by strangers online, just because of how you look. Now here's where things get real. And I want you to lean in because this moment, this right here, is when everything starts to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, not with a big fight or some viral comeback video. Well, Marcus didn't lash out. He didn't quit either. He did something even more dangerous in Rick's world. He kept showing up. Every single day. Same treadmill. Same weights. Same quiet focus. And slowly, something shifted in that gym. People started noticing. The front desk girl, who used to barely glance at Marcus, began saying hi with a smile. A few regulars even offered him tips or encouragement. The vibe was changing. And Rick, he didn't like it one bit. Now I know what you're thinking. This all sounds like it's building up to that classic underdog gets revenge plot, right? But hold that thought. 'Cause what's coming next? Nobody saw it coming. Not Marcus. Not Rick. Not even the gym manager who later admitted, "If I had known what was about to happen, I would have shut everything down that day." You see, what Rick didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just grinding through reps. He was planning something. Not revenge. Not violence. Something more precise. More poetic. And way more public. And that moment, that's the reason you clicked on this video. That's what you came here to see. But I'm not gonna drop it on you just yet. Because to really understand what happens next, you need to know how deep this cut goes. How Marcus's past ties into what happened that final day in the gym. How Rick's ego got played like a fiddle. And how karma, when it finally shows up, doesn't knock, it kicks the damn door in. This isn't just a story about bullying. It's about power, image, the quiet war between who we pretend to be and who we really are. And if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or like someone was laughing at your expense, this story is going to hit you in the chest. Hard. So don't go anywhere. Because the moment that changed everything, the one that made Rick wish he'd never opened his mouth in that gym, it's coming. And trust me, you do not want to miss how it unfolds. Because when karma finally strikes, it doesn't just humble the arrogant. It exposes them. Now picture this. It's a Monday morning just like any other. Rick's doing his usual rounds, phone in hand, filming his Monday motivation vlog. Marcus is on the bench press, headphones in, minding his business. The tension in the air is thick enough to cut with a knife. What happens next changes the lives of everyone in that gym. Forever. And that's where I'm going to leave you for now. Stay with me. The real story's just getting started. It all started to shift on that Monday morning, the one that was supposed to be like every other. But something about it felt different from the second Marcus walked through the gym doors. He wasn't sure what it was at first. Maybe it was the way people paused when they saw him, or how Rick, for once, wasn't already barking into his phone or flexing in front of the mirror. There was a strange quiet hanging in the air, like the calm before a storm. And that's when Marcus noticed it. The bench press area where he always trained, someone had moved the camera. Normally, the gym's security setup captured everything from multiple angles. But this time, the angle was off, as if someone had purposely shifted the camera away. It wasn't a big deal to anyone else, but to Marcus, it set off alarm bells. Because today wasn't just another workout for him. Today was the day he had planned to finally catch Rick in the act. Clear, undeniable proof of harassment. But now, it felt like someone already knew. He didn't say anything at first. He trained like normal, kept his head down, but the unease crawled deeper into his chest. And that's when the second thing happened. Right before leaving the gym, Marcus checked his locker. It was wide open. The combination he always used had been changed. His duffel bag was gone.
So was his phone. Panic rose in his throat like bile. He hadn't backed up the footage he recorded from the last few days, secretly, on a hidden body cam strapped inside his hoodie. Hours of clips showing Rick's bullying, his taunts, even that moment from 3 days ago when Rick shoved him during a circuit workout. It was all gone. Deleted. Wiped clean. And that's when he knew this wasn't just about gym drama anymore. Someone was watching him. Someone who didn't want the truth to come out. That night, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in his apartment, staring at the blank screen where all his evidence used to be. He felt like he was back at square one. Maybe even worse. But the thing about Marcus? He was done running. He'd spent years being quiet, letting the world push him around, pretending like it didn't hurt. Not anymore. He made a promise to himself. This wasn't over. Not even close. But the next day brought something even stranger. A message. No name. Just a burner email address. The subject line said, "Let it go." Or, "It gets worse." The message had one sentence. "You're not ready for what you'll find." Attached was a screenshot, an old photo, blurry, clearly taken years ago. But Marcus's face was unmistakable. Only this time, he wasn't alone. He was standing beside someone he hadn't thought about in over a decade. A man named Darren. An ex-friend. An ex-everything. The photo was from another life, a life Marcus had tried to forget. And now someone was using it against him. You see, back in his 20s, Marcus wasn't the quiet, humble guy people saw today. He was sharp. Ambitious. even a little ruthless. He and Darren had started a small tech company together until it imploded. There were rumors, lawsuits, people getting burned. Marcus had left the business world behind for a reason. But this photo, it wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. Someone knew about his past, and someone was using it to shut him down. Now the question wasn't just who's behind the bullying. It was, how deep does this go? Because Rick, as loud and obnoxious as he was, wasn't smart enough to pull off something this calculated. Someone else was pulling strings. Someone who had access to the gym's security system. Someone who knew Marcus's history. And maybe someone he trusted. That suspicion landed on one person, Jesse, the assistant manager at the gym. Friendly, always helpful, even offered to help Marcus set up his workouts and record his progress. Jesse had seemed like an ally. He was the one who told Marcus which days Rick usually showed up, which areas to avoid, how to keep a low profile. But suddenly, it all fell off. Too convenient. Too rehearsed. And when Marcus tried to reach Jesse the next day, nothing. Phone off. No response. Not even a read receipt. Jesse was gone. And now, things weren't just personal. They were dangerous. So Marcus started digging. He retraced every step, every encounter, every interaction from the past few weeks. He visited the security office, only to find out the footage from the past 3 days had been accidentally erased during a system update. The IT guy didn't even make eye contact when he said it. At this point, Marcus knew this wasn't about a gym bully anymore. This was about silencing someone, covering up something. But what? And then came the twist. While going through his cloud storage, desperately hoping something had backed up automatically, he found one file. A small video clip. Poor quality. But in it, you could make out 2 voices. One was Rick. The other, Jesse. But they weren't arguing. They were planning. Planning what looked like a setup. Rick's voice said, "Just make sure he sees the locker open. The rest'll take care of itself." Jesse replied, "You sure about this? He's not just some dude. He's been digging around." Then the clip cut out. That was it. No context. No explanation. But it changed everything. Why would Jesse help Rick? Why the threats? What secret were they trying to keep buried? And most importantly, what did Marcus stumble into that was so dangerous? Someone was willing to ruin his reputation, erase evidence, and dig up his past just to keep it hidden? Right when Marcus thought he was fighting one battle, he realized he was walking straight into something far bigger than he imagined. And here's the part that'll leave your jaw on the floor. Later that night, someone slipped a letter under his door. No envelope. Just a single sheet of paper with one line, written in black ink. Rick is just the distraction. That's it. No name. No signature. Just enough to make Marcus realize he's been looking in the wrong direction all along. And now, everything is about to explode. Marcus stared at that single line for what felt like hours. Rick is just the distraction. The words burned into his mind like a slow, smoldering fire, sparking 1,000 questions with no clear answer. It shifted everything. Up until now, Marcus had focused entirely on Rick, the loud, visible threat, the bully who mocked him openly, the one who made the gym a battlefield. But if Rick was just the distraction, then the real enemy was still hiding in the shadows, watching him, pulling strings behind the scenes. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was reality. Someone had been orchestrating this from the start, and the deeper Marcus looked, the more dangerous it became. He thought he was getting closer to the truth, but all he'd done was scratch the surface. And now the game was expanding. That night, something unexpected happened that took the mystery to another level. Marcus received a phone call from someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 5 years, his younger sister, Amina. They had grown apart over the years, mostly due to the fallout from the business debacle in his past. She had taken the blame for something Marcus had tried to shield her from, and their relationship never fully recovered. But her voice on the phone that night was trembling in a way Marcus had never heard before. "Did you send me something?" she asked. Confused, Marcus asked what she meant. She said a man in a gray hoodie had shown up at her doorstep earlier that day. No name, no words, just handed her an envelope and walked away. Inside was a printed photo, an old childhood picture of Marcus and Amina standing in front of their family home, but with something eerie added. Across the top, written in the same black ink as the note Marcus received, were the words, "Some debts don't disappear." Suddenly, this wasn't just about gym harassment. It wasn't even just about Marcus anymore. Someone was targeting people close to him, reaching into his personal life, unearthing things that had long been buried. And for what? Revenge? Silence? Or something worse? Amina had no connection to Rick, no link to the gym. She lived in San Diego, 2 hours away, far removed from Marcus's daily routine. Which meant whoever was doing this had access not just to Marcus's past, but his present. They knew his relationships, his history, his vulnerabilities. The thought alone sent a cold chill racing down his spine. Desperate to find some kind of answer, Marcus decided to go back to where it all started, the tech company he and Darren had founded years ago. He hadn't set foot near that building since everything fell apart, but something about the recent threats made him suspect the past and present were bleeding together for a reason. The office had changed ownership since then, but Marcus managed to talk to the building supervisor, claiming he was doing a piece on local startup history. It was a long shot, but it paid off. The supervisor let him in and, while walking through the dusty remains of what used to be his dream, Marcus found something unexpected, an old server drive buried in a filing cabinet marked for disposal. It had no label, no documentation, just a worn piece of masking tape with the number 04 scribbled on it. Back at his apartment, he plugged the drive into his computer. Most of the files were corrupted or empty, but one folder stood out. Inside were dozens of documents, email exchanges, and client contracts, some with names he recognized, others that were redacted. But what really froze Marcus in place was a hidden audio file tucked deep inside a subfolder. When he played it, he recognized 2 voices instantly, his own and Darren's. It was from a heated conversation they had during the early days of the company's collapse. Only this time, the file included something Marcus had never heard before. At the end of the clip, Darren made a cryptic statement. "We bury this now, or we both go down. You think it's about money, but this is way bigger than us." That one line cracked the entire timeline wide open. Marcus had believed the fallout with Darren was over a failed business deal and a broken friendship. But now, it seemed there was something more, something they'd both hidden, something Marcus had either forgotten or repressed. And someone had just opened that wound on purpose. It was all spiraling now. Evidence was showing up in the most unexpected places. People were being dragged into danger, and nothing felt like coincidence anymore. The fact that someone had access to a 10-year-old private audio recording meant this wasn't a random threat. It was a calculated, long-term setup. Someone had been watching Marcus for years, just waiting for the right moment to strike. And if Rick was just the distraction, then it begged the question, who is the real enemy? The more Marcus thought about it, the more Jesse kept popping into his mind. The assistant manager, who had vanished into thin air after helping Marcus and possibly Rick, had always seemed too helpful, too informed. What if Jesse wasn't just a pawn? What if he was the connection between Marcus's past and his present nightmare? It made sense. Jesse was the one who knew when Rick would be in the gym, the one who offered to help with the locker situation, the one who encouraged Marcus to document everything. Maybe it wasn't help. Maybe it was bait. And Marcus walked right into it. Then, without warning, Marcus received another message. This time, it was a video. A low-res recording of someone walking through his apartment while he was gone. Slow, deliberate, almost like they wanted him to see how easily they could get in. The person was wearing gloves and a hoodie, face hidden. But before the video ended, they paused in front of Marcus's computer, looked directly into the camera, and held up a piece of paper with a new message. Keep digging, and she disappears. There was no question who she was. They were threatening Amina. And just like that, the stakes shot through the roof. Now Marcus wasn't just fighting for truth. He was fighting to protect the only family he had left. But with enemies hiding in plain sight, evidence disappearing, and every step forward unraveling a new layer of betrayal, the real question wasn't whether Marcus could survive this. It was whether he could find the truth before it swallowed him whole. Because somewhere out there, someone knew exactly what he was trying to uncover. And they weren't going to let him get there without a fight. And as Marcus sat in silence, surrounded by notes, old drives, screenshots, and more questions than answers, his phone buzzed once more. A new message. No sender. No subject. Just two chilling words. Too late. And that's when everything changed. The message, too late, hit Marcus like a brick wall. He read it once, then again, hoping maybe he misread it, hoping there was some meaning he hadn't grasped yet, but deep down he knew what it meant. Whoever was behind this wasn't bluffing anymore. They were escalating. And worse, they were ahead of him. He had been playing catch-up this entire time, thinking he was slowly piecing together a mystery, unraveling a plot that began with a gym bully and stretched into his dark past. But as he sat in the dim light of his apartment, staring at that message on the cracked phone screen, something inside him cracked too. And that's when it happened. The twist that turned his entire world upside down. His door buzzed. A delivery. He wasn't expecting anything. No name, just a cardboard envelope. He opened it slowly, his heart pounding like a drum in his ears. Inside, a flash drive. Just one single label scribbled across it in marker. 1998. That made no sense. Marcus was barely a teenager in 1998. What could possibly be on that drive from so long ago? Confused, unsettled, but desperate for any kind of clue, he plugged it into his laptop. One folder appeared. One video file. And when he played it, everything changed. The footage was grainy, obviously digitized from an old VHS tape. It showed a dimly lit room. Someone sitting in a folding chair, clearly unaware they were being recorded. Marcus leaned in closer, squinting. The face was younger, but familiar. It was Darren. Maybe 16 or 17. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his hands. And then, a second figure entered the frame. A man. Tall, serious, face partially obscured by the angle of the shot. But his voice was unmistakable. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. It was his father. Marcus's father had died years ago. At least, that's what Marcus had believed all this time. A heart attack. Sudden. Tragic. The family buried him, mourned him, and moved on the best they could. But there he was, alive and speaking in a low, clipped tone to Darren, saying things Marcus couldn't quite believe. "This project doesn't leave this room," he warned Darren. "You're smart, but smart doesn't mean safe. If you talk, if you slip, even once, it's not just you who pays. It's your family. Understand?" Marcus's entire body went cold. He couldn't breathe. None of this made sense. What project? Why was his father threatening Darren? What did it have to do with what was happening now? The video continued, but the audio became distorted, voices warping as if the tape itself didn't want the secrets heard. But one final phrase came through clear, cutting like a knife. "If Marcus ever finds out, he'll destroy everything." Marcus slammed the laptop shut, his hands shaking violently. He couldn't tell if he was angry, afraid, or simply in shock. Everything he thought he knew had just been shattered. His father wasn't who he said he was. Darren wasn't just a partner or a friend. He was part of something bigger, something buried so deep that it took decades to surface. And now, someone had brought it all back to life. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for control. And then came the knock at the door. Marcus stood frozen, heart hammering, wondering if he was about to meet the end of his story. Slowly, cautiously, he opened the door, and there she stood. Amina. Her eyes were wide, her breath ragged, and in her hand was another letter. She didn't speak at first, just held it out. Marcus opened it carefully, almost afraid of what he'd find. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typed clinical. It was a page from a psychiatric evaluation, his own, dated 6 months after his father's supposed death. Marcus's name at the top. Diagnosed with acute dissociative amnesia. He blinked, confused. He didn't remember this. He had never been to therapy. He never had amnesia. Or at least, he didn't think he did. Amina finally spoke. "Marcus, this isn't just about Darren. Or Rick. Or the company. I didn't know until today, I swear. But you've been here before. You've lived this before. The words hit him harder than the threats ever could. She explained that their father had been involved in a classified government contract in the late 90s, something involving behavioral manipulation, memory suppression, and neurological control. Darren had been one of the test cases. But somehow, Marcus had ended up entangled in it too. Not just as a bystander. As a subject. Amina said she had recently been contacted by a woman claiming to be a former whistleblower from the program. She said Marcus's entire identity had been compromised, memories altered, parts of his past erased completely, including the truth about their father, about what he did, and about why Darren and Rick were just pawns in a much bigger scheme. The bullying, the threats, even the gym surveillance, it was all a trigger. A setup designed to awaken something inside Marcus that had been locked away for decades. Now, the bullying wasn't the mystery. It was the cover story. The real story, the real twist, was that Marcus wasn't just a victim. He was the key. And the people coming after him weren't random enemies. They were the same ones who had controlled his life before. And now they wanted it back. So when Amina showed him the final piece, a photograph of their father, dated just 3 months ago, very much alive and standing next to a man who looked eerily like Jesse, Marcus understood. Jesse wasn't a pawn. He wasn't a bystander. He was family. And suddenly, Marcus wasn't sure who he really was anymore. Not everything hidden stays buried. And now, the real story begins. Marcus sat in silence, his world unraveling faster than he could process it. The photograph Amina had handed him still trembled between his fingers, the edges worn from her own grip. His father, supposedly dead for over a decade, alive and well, standing next to Jesse, the man Marcus had come to rely on for help, the man who had played the role of confidant, ally, and, apparently, co-conspirator. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was identity collapse. Everything Marcus thought he knew, his family, his friends, his past, was now a question mark, and every answer came laced with consequences. But he didn't have the luxury of time to make sense of it all. Because with that photograph came a second letter, one with no return address, no signature, just a stamped ultimatum. You have 72 hours to bring the drive to Dock 17. Come alone, or your sister vanishes. The walls closed in around him. The drive, labeled 1998, was still in his laptop. It was the only hard proof of the truth he'd uncovered, the only tangible link to the people behind the lies. But now it had become a bargaining chip, a weapon, and if he gave it up, he risked losing every ounce of leverage he had. If he held on to it, though, he'd be gambling with Amina's life. The weight of that choice crushed him. She was the only person left in this world who knew the real Marcus, the version buried beneath trauma and manipulation, and now, because of him, she was a target. He wanted to believe there was a third option, a way out that didn't involve betrayal or surrender, but that fantasy disappeared the moment Amina broke down in tears across from him. You don't get it, Marcus, she said, her voice cracking as she struggled to hold herself together. I got that photo weeks ago. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to drag you back into it. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, if I disappeared for a while, they'd forget about me. But they didn't. They watched me. They followed me. They waited for you to find the drive. You didn't start this. You just finally picked up the thread. Her words made his heart ache. She wasn't just afraid. She was exhausted. She had been carrying a burden he didn't even know existed, all in silence. And now he had to look her in the eyes and tell her what she feared the most, that he couldn't guarantee her safety. Not anymore. He needed answers, and there was only one person left who could give them, Darren. The thought of facing Darren again twisted Marcus's stomach into knots. Their friendship had been the only steady thing during the chaos of their youth, and its collapse had scarred them both. But now that Marcus knew Darren was involved in something far darker, something tied to government secrets, memory tampering, and family lies, he had no choice but to confront him. Not as a friend, not even as an enemy, but as someone who held a piece of the puzzle Marcus couldn't solve without him. Finding Darren wasn't hard. He was still in the same rented townhouse on the outskirts of town, living a life so eerily normal it made Marcus sick. He waited until nightfall and knocked. Darren opened the door, and the moment their eyes met, the air between them turned to static. "I was wondering how long it'd take," Darren muttered, stepping aside to let him in. The house was quiet, but something felt off, like the walls themselves had secrets. Marcus didn't waste time. "Why didn't you tell me about my father? About Jesse? About the project?" Darren just laughed, not cruelly, but like someone who had carried a secret for far too long and was finally too tired to hold it anymore. "Because they made me promise," he said. "And because I knew what would happen if you remembered." "What would happen?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising. Darren looked him dead in the eyes. "You'd wake up." And just like that, another layer peeled back. Darren explained that Marcus had been the centerpiece of the project, not a peripheral figure, but the core. He was the only one who had survived the full extent of the tests, the only one whose mind could be fragmented and reassembled like a puzzle, without losing functionality. The experiments weren't about deleting memories, they were about hiding them, locking them away until a trigger brought them back. And that trigger? The gym.
Rick.
The humiliation. The sense of being powerless again. It had been manufactured from the start to awaken the pieces of Marcus that had been dormant for over a decade. Darren wasn't just a friend. He had been the handler, the monitor, the one who filed the reports when Marcus showed signs of remembering. And Jesse? Jesse was the replacement handler after Darren walked away, guilt-ridden and sick of the lies. Marcus felt sick. It was too much. He had been studied, controlled, manipulated by people he trusted most. His life hadn't been lived, it had been observed. But there was no time to grieve, no time to collapse under the weight of the revelation. Because Darren ended the conversation with something Marcus couldn't ignore. "If you don't deliver that drive, they'll take her. But if you do, you'll never get your memory back. They'll wipe you clean again, just like before. And this time, you won't come back." That was the choice. Amina's safety, or his truth. Protect his only remaining family, or finally break free from the system that had puppeteered his entire life. Both options meant loss. Both came with consequences he couldn't undo. And in that moment, Marcus realized something terrifying. He wasn't just the protagonist of this story. He was its weapon. And now someone else held the trigger. The clock was ticking. 72 hours. And the next move he made would change everything. The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It hammered down on the city like it was trying to scrub it clean, erase everything and start again. But no amount of storm could wash away what Marcus now knew. The world he thought he lived in, where people went to work, hit the gym, got coffee, and laughed with friends, was only a thin layer of paint over a system built on secrets, mind games, and manipulation. Every step he took now felt like it echoed with the weight of lives, not just his or Amina's, but countless others whose names he didn't even know yet. And the more he dug, the more he realized, this wasn't just about a drive, or a project, or a dead father who wasn't actually dead. This was about control on a scale so massive it felt like fiction. Darren had warned him, told him walking into this would make him a target all over again. But Marcus couldn't stop now. Not when the lies went deeper than blood. Not when time was running out. Because if what he'd just uncovered was true, then everything, from the bullying incident at the gym, to the recovered footage, to the blackmail letters and surveillance, wasn't random. It was coordinated, calculated. An entire web of control built around him, and others just like him. People who had been tested, altered, forgotten. People whose memories had been cut up and stitched back together like patchwork quilts, stitched just tight enough to hold their lives together until someone decided to tear it all down again. And the worst part? They weren't alone. He wasn't the only one. They were everywhere, walking around with smiles on their faces, living their lives with gaps in their memories they chalked up to bad years or weird phases. Marcus found the files, buried on an encrypted hard drive that Darren had stashed years ago and nearly forgot about. It had names, faces, locations,
Dozens of them.
some alive, some dead, all connected, all monitored, all participants. It wasn't a one-off project. It was a network, an operation still active. And then the betrayal hit. Jesse. Marcus had wanted to believe that somewhere beneath the lies, Jesse had grown close to him because he cared. Because they'd shared real moments, real conversations. But that illusion shattered the moment Jesse called from an untraceable number and didn't even bother pretending anymore. "They didn't want you to remember," he said, his voice cold and calm like he was reading off a script. "You were supposed to be dormant, but you never were." "Not really." Marcus asked him why. Why pretend to help him? Why build trust just to torch it? Jesse's voice shifted slightly, almost with a trace of regret. "Because part of you is real, and part of me believed we could contain it. But you're not someone who can be contained anymore." That was the final confirmation. Jesse had never been a friend. He was the failsafe. If things went too far, if Marcus remembered too much, Jesse's job was to guide him, not toward the truth, but toward surrender, compliance. And if that failed, to ensure the system cleaned up the mess. And now the system was coming. The messages weren't subtle anymore. No more anonymous threats or cryptic warnings. Amina disappeared that night. Her phone went dark. Her apartment was wiped clean, no signs of struggle, no leads. Just an envelope on her kitchen table with Marcus's name written in block letters and one word inside. "Choose." That was all it said. No ransom note. No instructions. Just a demand. A cruel reminder that his every move was being watched, every decision dissected by people who had been pulling strings long before he ever knew strings existed. And that's when it all snapped into focus. The gym bullying? Not random. Rick wasn't just a jerk. He had been triggering Marcus, pushing the emotional pressure points. The humiliation, the adrenaline spikes, the anger, all carefully orchestrated psychological stressors. Because they needed Marcus to break in just the right way. Not for revenge. For reactivation. And when he responded by digging, by questioning, by remembering, the game changed. The system escalated. He wasn't just a subject. He was a variable, an outlier in a controlled environment. And now, that variable had become a threat to the entire operation. Darren called again, his voice thick with panic this time. "They've initiated lockdown protocol. You have until sunrise. After that, they wipe everything. Not just your records. You." The weight of it slammed into Marcus like a train. He was out of time. No backup. No plan. Just him, a flash drive full of dark truths, and a choice that could either expose a conspiracy or bury it forever. And somewhere out there, Amina was waiting, maybe alive, maybe bait, maybe worse. But Marcus wasn't running anymore. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't playing their game. Because for the first time in his life, he saw it all clearly. And he knew the only way to break the system was to step right into the fire. But what he didn't know, what no one could have known, was that someone even closer to him had been feeding the system the whole time. Not Jesse. Not Darren. Someone he hadn't even considered. And they were waiting for him at Dock 17. The night air at Dock 17 was thick with fog, a ghostly curtain that curled around the dim orange floodlights like smoke from a dying fire. It was the kind of place built for secrets, a forgotten corner of the city that the public never visited and the authorities conveniently ignored. Marcus stood at the edge of the loading bay, heart pounding like a war drum, every step forward pulling him deeper into the storm he had spent his entire life unknowingly circling. In his jacket pocket was the drive, the last copy, encrypted and air-gapped, and in his veins was a cocktail of fear, fury, and adrenaline so potent it made every sound feel sharper, every shadow more alive. He didn't come here expecting to win. He came to finish it no matter what that looked like. He knew it was a trap. He knew they'd be watching. But what he didn't expect was who stepped out of the mist to greet him. Not Jesse. Not Darren. Not some faceless agent in a suit. It was his mother. He hadn't seen her in nearly 15 years. He thought she'd died in the car crash, the one they told him was an accident, the one that shattered what little remained of his childhood. But here she was, dressed in black, her eyes distant but familiar, like staring into a broken mirror. She looked older, of course, but not in the way people age naturally. She looked worn down by choices, by guilt, by the burden of secrets too heavy to carry alone. Marcus froze. The world seemed to pause with him. "I told them you wouldn't stop," she said softly, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "You were always like your father. Curious, stubborn, dangerous." Marcus's voice cracked as he spoke. "You're alive? All this time? You let me believe you were dead." She nodded slowly. "Because I had to. Because the only way to keep you safe was to make you forget." That word again, forget. The word that had followed him like a shadow, from the gym to the files to the memories stitched back together through pain and persistence. He stepped forward, fists clenched. "You were part of it. You knew everything. And you still let them do this to me." Tears welled in her eyes, but they didn't fall. "I didn't just let them. I asked them." And just like that, the last piece snapped into place. His mother hadn't been a bystander. She had been the architect. She wasn't protecting him from the system. She had helped build it. The entire project, the entire memory suppression protocol, had been her life's work. She was a neuroscientist, an early developer of behavioral erasure models, and when her own son became a test subject, she chose to believe it was for the greater good. But when the results spiraled out of control and Marcus began showing signs of psychological fracture, she tried to pull him out. That's when they faked her death. That's when they erased her, just like they erased him. Marcus's mind raced, unable to process the weight of it all. His entire life had been engineered by people who loved him, people who told themselves they were doing the right thing. The betrayal burned worse than anything Jesse or Darren had ever done. Because this came from blood, from home, from the one person who was supposed to protect him unconditionally. She stepped closer, reaching out like she wanted to hold him. "They took Amina because they knew it was the only way to bring you here. But she's alive. I made sure of that." "Then where is she?" Marcus demanded. "Let me see her." A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, just enough for Marcus to catch it. And in that instant, he knew she was lying. Maybe not about Amina being alive, but about everything else. The betrayal wasn't over. It was still unfolding. And then, from the corner of his eye, he caught movement in the shadows. Someone else was here, watching, waiting. And the moment Marcus turned, he saw the figure step forward, Jesse.
Armed. Calm.
And beside him, Amina, blindfolded.
Gagged.
But alive. Jesse spoke first. "This doesn't end with truth, Marcus. It ends with choice. Give us the drive, and she walks free. Keep it, and this all burns down with her." Marcus didn't hesitate. He pulled the drive from his jacket, held it up, and said, "I'll give it to you. But first answer me this. Why me? Why my family? Why go through all this?" And that's when Jesse smiled. A slow, unsettling grin. "Because you were never the only one. You were just the first one to wake up." Before the words could fully land, the dock lights exploded in a burst of gunfire. Tactical teams swarmed the area, some shouting for surrender, others screaming orders in a language Marcus didn't understand. The entire pier became chaos. Marcus dove behind a shipping container, dragging his mother with him, shielding her from the firefight as Jesse disappeared into the mist, dragging Amina behind him. For one terrifying moment, Marcus thought it was over, that he'd lost everything again. But then he heard her scream.
Raw. Real.
"Close." He ran through smoke and sirens, dodging bullets and bodies, until he reached the stairwell that led to the upper deck of the cargo tower. There, in a final confrontation, he faced Jesse in a brutal, desperate struggle. No tactics, no elegance, just fists, fury, and the kind of rage that comes from years of betrayal. The two of them slammed into steel walls, glass shattering, blood splattering, until Marcus got the upper hand and knocked Jesse unconscious, taking the blindfold off Amina with shaking hands. She looked up at him, eyes wide. "Marcus," she whispered, "there's more. The drive, it's not just about you." And when he turned it over, he finally saw what she meant. There was a second partition.
Hidden.
Encrypted under a different name. Project Legacy. Files not just about him, but about others. Names he knew. Politicians.
CEOs.
Media figures. All of them products of the same system. All of them manipulated. Programmed. Controlled. The conspiracy wasn't just personal. It was global. And just when he thought it was finally over, when he believed the truth had finally been unearthed, Amina's eyes went cold. She pulled away from him.
Slowly.
Deliberately. "I'm sorry," she said, almost inaudibly. "I never wanted to hurt you." Marcus blinked, stunned. "What are you talking about?" She pulled a tiny earpiece from her collar and whispered into it. "Target awake. Drive secured." The world froze again, just like it had when he first saw his mother, just like it had when Jesse revealed the truth. Amina wasn't just a sister. She was the final handler. And Marcus had just delivered the conspiracy right back into their hands. The rain had stopped by morning, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the storm ever had. The city seemed eerily still, like it was holding its breath in the wake of something it couldn't name. Marcus sat alone on the cold metal bench outside an abandoned train station, the drive resting in his palm like a ticking clock. Everything had unraveled faster than he could have prepared for: his mother's return, Jesse's betrayal, Amina's shocking revelation. In just one night, every truth he thought he had uncovered had been flipped inside out, leaving him with questions that no longer had easy answers. The organization didn't need brute force to win. They needed trust, intimacy, vulnerability. And they'd found all of it in the people Marcus leaned on most. That was the real weapon. Not surveillance. Not tech. Control through connection. And as he stared down at the now useless flash drive, wiped clean after Mina made her call, he understood just how deep that control ran. It wasn't just about data. It was about destiny. He never saw Mina again. After that final moment on the dock, she vanished. No digital trace, no sightings, nothing. Darren went underground, and Jesse's body was never recovered. The official news reports called it a gang-related firefight between rival smuggling groups. A few names were mentioned, all low-level fall guys, disposable. Nothing about Project Legacy. Nothing about the files, the psychological testing, the synthetic memory implants. And certainly nothing about Marcus. He became a ghost overnight. His apartment was emptied. His digital footprint erased. It was as if he had never existed. And maybe that's what they wanted. Maybe that was the final move. Not to kill him, but to make sure no one remembered him. To bury the truth beneath apathy, bureaucracy, and fear. But what they didn't realize was that Marcus had already copied the files before he handed over the drive. He wasn't naive. Not anymore. He'd stashed the real copy in a safety deposit box across the country, hidden under a fake name, rigged to be mailed anonymously to dozens of independent journalists and whistleblowers if he ever went missing. He didn't trust anyone, not even the law, but he believed in pattern disruption, the simple truth that even a well-oiled machine can be dismantled if you know where the gears grind. And though it didn't happen overnight, within weeks, rumors began surfacing online. Conspiracy forums, TikTok whistleblower accounts, anonymous Reddit posts. Nothing concrete. Just enough to stir doubt. Enough to rattle the edges of the illusion. And then something strange happened. People began remembering. Not everything. Not all at once. But flashes. Nightmares. Déjà vu so vivid it pulled people into full-blown panic attacks. Random individuals from across the country reported gaps in memory, strange symbols they'd seen as children, whispers of the same phrases Marcus had found buried in the data. You were chosen. You were conditioned. You were forgotten. The project's reach was unraveling not because Marcus fought it with fire, but because his defiance created cracks. And cracks have a way of spreading, even in the strongest glass. He never sought revenge. He never went back to confront Amina or his mother. Some wounds run too deep to close with apologies. But he did start writing. Journals, notes, code words, recollections of every moment he remembered and every moment he knew had been taken from him. It wasn't for justice. It wasn't even for exposure. It was for the next person who would come looking. The next outlier who would wake up. in the middle of the night with memories that didn't feel like their own and questions they were too afraid to ask. For them, Marcus wanted to leave breadcrumbs. He wanted to be the whisper in their ear when the rest of the world told them to forget. He wanted to be proof that you could survive the lie, even if you never fully escaped it. Years passed. The world moved on. New trends. New distractions. But the questions Marcus raised never went away. In fact, they only multiplied. And somewhere in the quiet corners of the internet, his story began to resurface. Not as fact, but as myth. The tale of a man who uncovered a global psychological experiment, who lost everyone he loved to the machine, and still managed to leave behind a trail of truth. Some called it fiction. Others called it prophecy. But those who had seen the signs, those who knew what was real, they called it a warning. And in the very last entry of his journal, Marcus wrote one final sentence, a message not to the system, but to the people still lost inside it. If you feel like something is missing, you're not crazy, and you're not alone. The camera slowly fades to black, the rain beginning to fall once more in the background, not as chaos, but as cleansing. And somewhere, in another quiet city, someone wakes up from a dream they don't remember falling asleep to, with a phrase repeating in their mind like a broken record. You were chosen. And just like that, the cycle begins again. Or maybe